For this portrait project, we're going to be using a program called Gravit Designer, which I will show you in a minute how to get started. But Gravit Designer is very similar to Illustrator. It's set up differently, doesn't have as many tools or as many different functions to be working with, but it has most of the basics that we're going to be using for this project. So you'll still be able to create a really creative, interesting portrait using these different tools. And then transitioning into Illustrator in the future, you'll have the foundation of how the pen tool works and all of the important tools that you will be eventually using when we get back into Illustrator, or if you go on to take a level 2 for this class. But Gravit Designer, again, is set up fairly similar to Illustrator, where you have at the very top of the screen some of the different drop-down panels. So File is where you can go to open images, save images. If you go to Import and then Place Image, you can place your photos. Edit is going to have just some of the basics with how to undo your image, which will have the same shortcut, Command Z. And then Paste Images, Select, Invert. Modify is where you're going to be able to do a lot with some of the different shapes that we create. So we'll be referring back to this in later practice images a lot. And then there's View and then Help if you have a specific thing that you want to look for. There's also a bunch of additional tutorials and videos that you can go to if you go to Learn and then Tutorials. So if you want to either further what we're working with, or if you're wanting to just look at something for your own use, definitely check out some of those tutorials. On the left side of the screen, you're going to find the Layers panel, which again is similar to Illustrator or even how Photoshop is set up. But every shape that you're creating, or every path, is going to automatically create a new layer, which is nice. We'll also be looking at how to organize those layers in the future so that those are going to be easy to work with. And then if you come over to the right of the screen here, when you create shapes, so each of these are different shapes, but when you create them, there's multiple settings that we'll work with for the shapes. So you can fill your shape with color using the eyedropper tool, or if you click directly on that circle, you can manually create the color that you want to work with. Towards the bottom, there is a bunch of additional effects that you can use. So there's blur, color adjust, drop shadow, inner shadow, and then there's a few more here as well that we'll be working with in the future on future practice images. But now that we've kind of gone over the basic layout, I want you to go to the link for Gravit Designer and open that up. So it should bring you to a page that looks like this. And you're going to just hit Get Started. And I'm already logged in, but it should bring you to a login screen. And you can just log in using your Brunswick email. I'm going to open an image from my computer. So you should have downloaded the first practice image, and I'm just going to open that image right now. So that first practice image looks like this. What I want you to do today is just work with the basics of the pen tool that we'll look at. So how to use the pen tool to create simple shapes, and then start to get a little more familiar with how it works in Gravit Designer, outlining some more shapes such as this flower here. But to get started with the pen tool, and it's actually called the Path tool in Gravit Designer, but to get started, I'm going to click on the pen tool here. And I'm just going to start with a straight line, just to get the feel for how this pen tool works. But you will eventually be using it to outline a bunch of different shapes in your portrait. So each of these are outlined as separate shapes that you would use with the pen tool here. So definitely good to get a feel for how it works. And I'm going to click to create my first anchor point where I want my line to start. And then to create the end of that anchor point, I'm going to click again. So created 2 anchor points there. And now there's a line extending off of this, showing me that I can continue my shape. But I'm just going to hit Enter on my keyboard to end the line. So then I'm going to click back on that pen tool and practice more of this zigzag shape. So I'm going to again create an anchor point every time I want my line to change direction. So I'm just trying to follow along with that line the best I can to get the feel for the pen tool. And then I'm going to hit enter to close that shape again. Grab the pen tool and outline the rectangle. And now for the rectangle, I'm going to make sure I close the shape. So anytime you're creating a shape, you want to start and end at the same spot. So I'm going to do that. And then go ahead and practice filling that with a color. So if you go down to where it says fill, you can click on that little white circle, choose a color to add to your square. And then I actually clicked off of my square so you can see that all of those settings disappeared. If that happens, or if you want to go back and change something, you want to click on your selection tool, which is similar to Illustrator, where you have the selection tool here called the pointer tool that will select your shape. It will also select an overall shape. But if you go to the sub-select or the direct selection tool, which is what it would be called in Illustrator, it would allow you to select the individual shape and edit where each of those anchor points are at. So you don't have to worry about changing or moving those anchor points right now, but just keep in mind, again, you have the selection tool that's going to select the entire shape, and then the direct selection tool that will select individual anchor points that you can adjust. You'll notice as well, when I was first trying to select the shape, it was not letting me because I had my background image unlocked, so it was only selecting my background image. So I would just make sure at some point you click on that background image, hit the lock button, that way it's out of the way and we can select the individual shapes that you create. And you can work with some of those other effects there as well if you would like to play around with them. For the border, I'm going to change the color of my border as well, and then change the size just so you can practice and see how that works. So I changed that size to 4. So far using the pen tool, we've done the straight lines. I want to practice a little bit with creating the wavy lines, which is a little bit trickier. But to create the wavy lines, you're going to start the same way. So I'm just going to click once to create my first anchor point. And then I'm going to come down to where the line or this curve starts to kind of change direction. So down kind of in the middle of that curve there. And then instead of clicking and letting go, I'm going to click and pull down with the anchor point here, which is creating something called a handle. So that straight line that you see coming off of this center dot here is called the handle, which is going to allow you to create the curve of your shape or of the line here. So I'm going to try to line that handle up so that the curve of my line continues as that wave there. And then I'm going to click back on that last anchor point so that I get rid of the handle, which allows me to have a straight line so I can create the curve how I want that to look, or create the wave how I want it to be angled. So then I'm going to click again for the next anchor point, and instead of letting go, I'm pulling down or pulling up and trying to adjust that handle so that that blue line lines up with the original line that I want to follow. And again, I'm going to click back on that last anchor point so I can get rid of this half of the handle, extend that line out to where it starts to change direction, pull down, line that up, go back, and then I'm going to click one more time here and pull to the side, and then adjust the angle. And then I'm going to hit enter to finish my shape. Now for this you can leave it, but I'm going to hide my fill so that I have just the line. And then the last step I want you to do is this flower. So try using that pen tool to outline the flower the best you can. So again, I'm just clicking, pulling to the side, and creating a new anchor point every time that line changes direction. And you can decide the colors that you want. You can play around with the fill, but give this a try just outlining all the way around the flower as well using the pen tool. When you're finished, you're going to go to File, Export, save it as a JPEG, and then go ahead and submit that image onto Classroom for me.